I've done a couple of videos now on dumb characters in horror, but how about we switch things up? Let's talk about the smartest characters in horror, the ones who made all the right decisions and you didn't have to be shouting at the screen for how idiotic every single choice that they made was. And we're gonna do this like we did the dummies. In the comments below, you're gonna see the characters I named off listed, and you just have to give a thumbs up to the ones that you thought were the real smarties. Whichever one has the most thumbs up is the real Einstein of the horror set. Oh, and in case you were wondering, on the last video of the dummies, at the time of me writing this, the winner with the most votes and dumbest character of that list was Lewis from Pet Sematary. Number 1. We're talking about Roger from Night of the Demons. So Rog is an iffy character because I guess it could be debatable if his actions are considered smart or if he's just sort of the cowardly character. But let's face it, he's the one who made all the rational decisions. He and his friends all bust into the spooky old Hull house, and he doesn't seem all that apprehensive at first, so it's not like he's just all around a chicken. But as soon as weird things starts to happen, he wants to get the hell out of there. If it weren't for the fact that the house magically blocked off the exit, he'd have been off the premises right away and completely clear of any shenanigans. But once it's apparent that there's bad stuff emanating from the house, he's not quick to go back in. Instead, he takes shelter in the car, a smarter spot to hang out instead of the giant haunted mansion. He only goes back in when it becomes clear that the car is not a safe spot either, and he spends a good portion of the rest of the film staying away from danger by doing the smart thing, running away from it. You can call that cowardly if you want, but look what happened to all the other characters that decided to go up against the demons. Did they live? Nope. In fact, Rog's instinct to beat feet is what made him the first one to safety, and when it's obvious that Judy can't climb the wall, the dude climbs that thing in record time and saves her. So whatever, you can call me cowardly too, because if I'm ever in a situation where there's freaking demons roaming around, I'm gonna follow Roger's example and head in the opposite direction as quickly as possible. So Roger survived because of some quick, smart thinking, but is he the smartest one here? Number 2, MacReady from The Thing. There's no way this movie doesn't end up here, and there's no way that Mac isn't on this list. I mean, not only is he one of the coolest characters in horror, but he's played by one of the coolest actors in Kurt Russell. Also, since he's here on this list, he's one of the smartest. Why? Well, I'm going to boil it down to one thing he does. Several things over the course of the movie that I would consider to be intelligent, but there's one thing in particular that puts him on another level: the blood test. In the midst of all this madness going on, but with people turning into spider heads and having to set folk on fire and being accused by his buddies of being a space duplicate, this dude is still paying attention to the details. Amongst everything that's going on, RJ was able to see Norris's head separating from his body, and his takeaway from that is that every part of the creature is alive and interested in self-preservation. Now, that realization alone is pretty clever, but our boy isn't done there. Nah, from there he comes up with an entire plan to use that information to squirrel out the imposters in their midst. He actually determines that if each part of the thing is interested in surviving, then he could take a bit of blood from everyone and see if it reacts to a hot needle, revealing which of them is a thing in disguise. Now, he shows a bit of a crack in the armor of his intelligence, as he has apparently put all of his suspicions on Gary and declares that he plans to test him last since he's the most likely culprit, never really suspecting the actual creature, Palmer. So it's not like he's a brainiac in every situation, but still devising this little litmus test based on only the information of a human head splitting from the body and turning into some sort of spider head, which I'm guessing is not a part of the Spider-Verse. Number 3, Ginny from Friday the 13th Part 2. Friday the 13th final girls are a breed all to themselves. They range from the crafty to the straight-up supernatural, including psychic girls and telekinetic powerhouses. But out of what is essentially around a dozen different survival girls, the one that stands out as being particularly clever is Ginny from Part 2. She establishes herself right away as being strong-willed when she's chastised for being late and pushes back, but it's set up pretty early on that she's studying to become a child psychologist, letting the audience know that she's not a vapid co-ed. The film reminds us frequently that she's pretty damn capable, more so than her male counterpart, Paul. She knows more about her car than he does and beats him at chess, and when she hears his tale about the young Jason Voorhees, instead of just brushing it off as a silly campfire tale, she actually mulls it over and thinks about it. She sympathizes with the Voorhees family plight and is able to get into his head, considering the things that he's been through and seen. But her craftiness is really uncovered in the final act of the film, as she and Paul return to the camp where most of the counselors have already been killed off. She's the one that figures out right away that there's something amiss and wants to take it seriously. After a series of instances of her showing her strong side as well, as she's able to fight back against the bumpkin, she's trapped in his cabin. Thankfully, she uses her psychology skills to trick Jason into seeing her as his mother. She uses her knowledge to her advantage and turns them against him, which almost works. And sure, Paul does come in at the last second to actually help out, the tiniest amount, but it's Ginny that delivers that final blow. Number 4, Sidney Campbell from Scream. Now, Sid has shown up in 5 of the Scream movies, and she's survived them all, so clearly she's a step above your typical final girl. But mere survival is not a reason for inclusion on this list. I mean, Laurie Strode has survived a ton of encounters with Michael Myers, and I didn't put her on here, so you have to do more than just live through it all to be here. You have to make some solid decisions, and Sidney did those. She did those a bunch. But for the sake of this challenge here, we're focusing on her performance in the first Scream movie only. First up, she shows an awareness of horror movie tropes, giving her a slight edge in terms of survival. She's aware of the various hurdles that a horror victim is going to face, and how to avoid them. Now, she does get off to a rough start because she gets a phone call that says they're outside watching her, and she goes out on the porch. And then earlier, she says that horror girls make the mistake of running upstairs when they should be going out the front door. And that's exactly what she does. Granted, the front door has a latch on it, preventing an easy out, but you may want to chastise her for going up the steps instead of just running out the back. But that's an easy criticism that doesn't really pay off, especially considering we had earlier seen Casey run out the door, and we saw how that turned out for her. Instead, Sid knows that she can get into her room and use the doors to block entry, and use the computer to contact 911, so it turns out to be the exact right move. But the finale is where she shines. When she's unsure who the killer is and has a 50-50 chance, she doesn't waste time and just shuts the door on both. And when Gail gives her the chance to get away from the killer duo, she's able to use their own tools against them and then take them out, making sure to double tap Billy before he gets the chance to do his final lunge. Number 5, Captain Miller from Event Horizon. Okay, this one is going to be a little brief because it all comes down to one thing, and it's the sort of thing that a lot of horror characters could really learn from. In Event Horizon, there's a starship called the Event Horizon, and it has disappeared into space 7 years earlier. But then, suddenly, the ship reappears around Neptune, so another ship is sent to investigate. When Morpheus and his team, which includes Alan Grant, they soon discover some sort of video message from the previous crew that depicts their horrible fate, as they're shown to go insane and have a massive orgy of sex and mutilation. The captain's final words are, "Save yourself from hell." So, what's Captain Miller's response to this?
We're leaving.
Yeah, that's it. That's the end of the segment. Number 6, Kirsty from Hellraiser. I feel like the characters of the original Hellraiser are just a little more intelligent in general, but that may just be my bias towards British accents. Just sound smarter. But Larry Cotton doesn't have one, and maybe that's why I see him as being a bit dumber. But that may also be because he's too dumb to realize that his wife is cheating on him and then killing multiple people in their house. Kirsty doesn't have an accent though, but she ain't no dummy. So when she gets her hands on the puzzle box, first up, she's able to solve it, which they later explain is not the easiest of tasks. I think that overall, it's supposed to be something that's a challenge, as they explain in the second movie, although every other Hellraiser movie makes it seem easy as pie to open that sucker. But initially, you're supposed to think that it's not that easy. But when she does open it and is confronted with the Cenobites, she uses some quick thinking to negotiate with them instead, pointing out that one of their subjects has escaped them and makes a deal to return him to them. It's because of this smart move that she's able to survive the scenario. Later, when they renege on the deal, she still manages to use some smarts to use the lament configuration to send them back to hell. Plus, in the second film, she also reads up on the human identity of the Hell Priest, getting information about him to use against him in their next encounter, tapping into his human side. And let me tell you, being quick on your feet and coming up with plans and stuff while chains are shooting out through the air and literally pulling people into pieces 5 feet from you, yeah, that's not easy to do. I mean, not like I'm speaking from experience or anything, but I think I could say that pretty confidently, right? Like if there's someone out there that's had a person yanked to chunks right next to them and found it super simple to still scheme something, then I guess let me know. But also in the second movie, Christie's smart enough to do that skin switch thing to fool the doc, and that seems to work as well, which is a pretty clever move, making another smart move in her book. Number 7, Ripley from Alien. Ah, come on, you knew she was going to be on here, and I don't want to hear any complaints about Alien not being a horror film, since it's often described as a haunted house story in space. So yeah, like I did with Sydney, I'm gonna narrow this down to one movie, the original Alien film, and that's because with Ripley, that's all I need. She has enough smarts in that first film to take this, so let's take a look and see what she pulls off. First up, she's the one that wants to follow quarantine procedures, and if the rest of the crew had listened to her, then the entire goddamn franchise wouldn't have happened. You see, when Kane encounters the facehugger on the big ship, they bring him back, but Ripley won't let them in, since the company has specific protocols in place for just such an occasion. Eventually, though, Dallas and Ash went over her head and opened the door, allowing the alien specimen on board and Kane's mug. There's then a series of circumstances on the ship leading to a number of deaths, but as soon as Dallas is killed by the xenomorph, command goes to Ellen, and what's her first order of business? Blow up the whole freaking Nostromo. The only way to be sure, right? She knew that their chances up against the creature didn't look good, so she's like, screw it, load up in the escape shuttle and nuke the thing from orbit. Finally, after the space bug ends up killing everyone else, and the Rip manages to get away on the escape ship, and watches as the nosy blows up, but when it turns out that the dickhead hitched a ride with her, she uses her surroundings to set up the creature and launch it off into space, killing it once and for all, without the use of any of the heavy artillery a squad of Space Marines would have on them. She don't need all that, because she's Ellen damn Ripley. Number 8, Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th Part 4. Well, we've already talked about one survivor of a Voorhees rampage, so let's discuss one more. This one, though, is quite a bit younger, since it's the young version of Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. Tommy's not particularly a smart character in his later versions. I mean, in Part 5, he's pretty withdrawn and doesn't even come up against Jason too much until the final reel, and it doesn't particularly display any extraordinary intelligence. In Part 6, he's dumb enough to want to dig up Jason's body and jam the equivalent of a lightning rod into him, and is then all shocked when lightning hits it and restores him to life. I mean, well, I'd be surprised too about the whole restoring to life thing. It's not like that's a common occurrence. But regardless, digging up a killer's body just to further mutilate it can never really be seen as a smart rational decision. But we're not talking about parts 5 or 6. We're talking about the OG Teddy Duchamp version, the Edgar Frog Jarvis, the old Feld dog. And if you think this was one of his early films, oh no, he had 25 credits before this one. So little Tommy is pretty clever, since he makes masks that are damn complex and probably more advanced than a kid out in the middle of nowhere should be able to create. But little Jarvis can handle it. He also knows how to fix a car, showing he has some mechanical aptitude as well. But his real test comes in the final act, as Jason is attacking him and his sister, chasing them from house to house. When his sis is engaging the big guy, little Tommy thinks fast and realizes that he needs a diversion. Using his mask-making skill, oh wait, no, that doesn't happen. That's kind of just set up for nothing. Just using a razor, he realizes that he can cause a diversion. He had earlier seen a picture of young Jason, so he quickly shaves off his hair. And I should point out that he somehow manages to do this very, very quickly and super cleanly. And it seems like he only had these little scissors, but I think I see a straight razor, which seems to be here on the sink. So he's super efficient with that. But yeah, it works. His super clever thinking distracts him enough so his sister can knock off Jason's mask, and Tommy then delivers that killing blow, finishing off the villain forever, since this was the final chapter, and all the following movies were just Tommy Jarvis fishing. Number 9. Danny from The Shining. This is another one that's kind of based around one specific scene, and we're talking about Danny Torrance from the Stanley Kubrick Shining. And I guess that's a specification that's necessary, considering that this moment is not present in the original Stephen King novel. Now, throughout the film, it's not like Danny shows any real sparks of genius. He's not portrayed as a crafty kid or anything, and actually more often than not puts himself into some dumb, dangerous situations. But near the ending of the film, he does something that makes him a bona fide Mensa member. In the middle of a massive snowstorm, Danny's dad, the Joker, has a massive breakdown. Or I don't know, ghosts take him over. Or if you're into that, I guess his mother imagines a bunch of stuff. And hey, I wasn't gonna address this, but I'm gonna, because I did a Shining Unanswered Questions video a while back, and 100 people told me that I should have talked about the Wendy theory because it explains everything. And I'll just address this here, that I think it's a nice theory, but it's just built on minor continuity details and completely disregards any of the themes or narrative threads of the film itself. And in my personal opinion, it's an empty theory. But I digress. Danny. We're discussing the Danny theory, and that's that Danny is theoretically a genius for his clever move at the ending. As his dad is chasing him through the snowy mess of the topiary maze, the kid comes up with the brilliant idea to confuse his stalker. How? He walks backwards, stepping into his previous footmarks, masking the fact that he is doubling back. He then ducks off into another passage, covering those tracks, causing Jack to keep following a set of footprints that seem to magically just stop. It's some quick on-the-spot maneuvering on the kid's part and saves his life and dooms his dad to an icy grave. Number 10. Joel from Scream 2. We've already talked about the Scream series and established that Sidney Campbell rocked the house in terms of being smart enough to outwit the killers. There's one character from the series that showed a different kind of intelligence, and it's Joel from Part 2. Now, you may not immediately remember this guy, since it's not like he was one of the major players of the series, and it turns out that there's a very good reason for that. Played by Dwayne Martin, he was Gale's new cameraman, replacing Kenny from the first film. Now, if you remember Kenny, he was pretty easily killed off by Ghostface in the finale of that one, having his throat slashed. Joel, his replacement, shows signs of being smart as soon as the murders start up again, and his boss decides to try to dive right in to uncover the story. As such, he ends up reading her book and finding out about the fate of his predecessor. Right after, he begins to note that he's in danger. He realizes that he's a likely victim, especially considering what happened to Gale's previous cameraman, and probably knows enough about horror movies to know what happens to side black characters, like, well, every other black character in this film. But Joel's not going out like that. Nope, when he's there for the big sort of showdown in the middle of the campus quad, he witnesses the aftermath of Randy's death. After that, he decides the smartest move would be to get the heck out of Dodge and leaves the campus area, taking himself out of the roster of potential cannon fodder. He looks at the situation, says there's a killer loose on this campus, and he's targeting people around this group of people, so I'm getting away from this campus and this group of people. Dude's a genius. He doesn't show up again until the killers are dead, only reappearing once things are safe, because he's smart enough to know a job's a job. Number 11, Marty from Cabin in the Woods. Marty is probably a weird fit for this list because in the movie, he's the character that they've designated as the fool. He's meant to be the dumb comic relief, the silly guy. But here's the thing, they've had to specifically spike his stash in order to dumb him down, and it still doesn't really work. So the whole thing with the cabin is that a sacrifice of 5 archetypes is required by the old gods in order to keep them from destroying the world. And Marty is one of those 5. And for the first part of the film, he seems to fit the part. He comes off as doofy and not too bright, but as soon as they get to the cabin, he shows signs of pushing back against the sort of programming that they were hoping for him. Instead of simply being the fool, he starts exhibiting sharper traits than any of his counterparts. And he's the one that can hear the subliminal messaging in the house and tries to warn everybody about the dangers of being in the cellar with the cursed objects. It's Marty that is able to locate the hidden cameras there and doesn't fall prey to the suggestions given by the gassing. Granted, that's because he had a secret stash of untampered with weed that helped him defy their programming and such. But for a moment, it seems like his smart thinking doesn't amount to anything as he's killed. But, of course, the reports of his death were greatly exaggerated, as he was able to overcome his opponent. But how did he do it? Well, by realizing his opponent was unkillable, and instead simply cutting off his limbs to make him immobile. Also, he's smart enough to realize that the world would probably be better off with all the people dead and a race of ancient gods taking over to destroy everything, because if you think about it, it's starting to sound like an improvement. So there you have it, 11 characters from horror movies, all making some really smart and smooth moves. Let me know down below in the comments if there's other characters that you think would fit this mold, other smart characters, and those can be thumbs up as well too. But look down below, find the one that you think is the smarty pants of them all, and give it that thumbs up. You can do more than one if you want. You can thumbs up several of them. That's totally fine. But the one with the most thumbs up will be horror's smartest character, at least until we do another round and we try to whittle this down even further. Let me know more of those down below. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by hitting that like button on the video also. Subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, like these guys do. They help me. They help support this channel. You can do that just by watching these videos also and sharing it out to your friends. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you for another short one very soon. Thanks a lot, guys, and bye-bye.